Hello and welcome to episode 66 of the Truuman Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Payne. Andrew, hello, how are you doing?
Hi, great. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the chat.
Me too. I'm really looking forward to this one. We've had a couple of conversations on LinkedIn over the old comment section. So we agree on some things and we disagree on some things. So I'm excited to get into this. But as always, Andrew, in your own words, what makes you a man?
What makes me a man? So, on a basic level, I see myself as a man because I was born a boy with a penis, still have that attached. So, went through puberty. So, I would never think that I'm not a man or I am a man. That's what makes me a man. I'm biologically male. Perhaps if you ask me what kind of man would I like to be, for me, there's certain things that, like, I don't ask myself that question every day. That would be ridiculous to ask myself. Well, it wouldn't be ridiculous, but I'm busy. I'm a dad. I got a lot going on in my mind. But I do ask myself that question from time to time. I ask myself that question when I feel like I've been heavy-handed with the kids and I regret having been such a shouty dad and overreacting. And I ask myself this question. And for me, I suppose I was thinking about this only the other day. There are a few things that I would say, it's not that these things make me a man, but in this season of my life in which I'm currently in, these things are important to me about the man that I wanted to be. So for me, it's really important as a man. I'm not saying that women, people can't do this too, but this is important to me as a man. This sense of creating community and being a real includer. I find that when you join new things, there's lots of people that are happy and friendly and say hello, but that's about as far as it goes. And actually, you can feel quite unfriendly. You can still feel like you're on the outside, even though everyone says hello. No one takes it any further than that. So for me, in being an includer, yes, you've got to look after your own. There's that saying, isn't there? Looking after your own. You've got to look after your own family, but reaching out beyond your own doorstep, making people feel welcome, spotting when people are on their own and drawing them in. And when you go up and introduce someone that you can see is on your own, and they are on their own, rather than then seeing your mate and saying, "Oh, right, that was nice meeting you." You take them with you and you introduce them and you include and you help them to create networks. So for me, that includer community part is a very important part for me being a man, looking out for your tribe, extending the tribe.
Yeah.
For me, encourager is massive, but to encourage properly, we have to put our damn phones down and notice so that we can encourage specifically, because otherwise we can't encourage specifically, and then that renders the encouragement completely meaningless. If I say to my boy, "You were fantastic today on the football pitch on a Saturday morning," why? Says who? Because what did he do that was particular? So that means if I'm going to be an encourager, that's the kind of man I want to be, then I have to be present, which means therefore my habits around my phone, distraction, even if my phone's down, often my mind's whirring away at a million other things. So when I'm with someone, it could be a client, could be my kid, could be my wife, remembering to be present in that moment in time is so includer, as community builder, sort of encourager. And the last thing I would mention for me, it is important, I feel, as a man, as the man I want to be, to stand up for the things that I believe in. But I think as men, as people, but I'm speaking as a man, we have to be careful what we stand up for, that we have fact-checked and fact-checked and fact-checked again. I think it's important to be active as a man, but to think through the causes that you say you're going to support and the things that you're going to protect. Think it through. A sort of a fact-finding, intelligent protector of what is right. So there you go. That's what's important to me about being a man.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say it as if it's future rather than now. Is there anything like sort of linked to that? You say this is what the man I want to be. Why do you not want to?
Well, I think it's the man I am. Yeah, no, that's probably just a verbal habit rather than anything particularly deep and meaningful, I suppose. I think that is the man that I am.
Yeah, great.
But I think modern life has a habit of challenging those things. So we're always looking for quick answers, simple answers to complex solutions, because we're bombarded by data. You've got households now where both parents are working. That's the norm. which is fine. I'm all about the emancipation of women. But actually, if both parents are working in this data-filled world, life is relentless 24/7, then actually standing up and fact-checking the things that you stand up for, that's hard to do. Actually, being present isn't easy to do. So it is the man that I am, but I regularly check in. I'm conscious that I'm not flawless in delivering on the things that I've just said. I'm not flawless on delivering on being included, because it's difficult talking to people you don't know, or it takes time. You might feel a bit tired. It's easier to talk to your mates that you've known. And so drawing them in and then drawing them into your circle, actively doing that takes effort. So that is who I am, but I'm conscious it's a constant work in progress.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way of putting it. I think that you mentioned flawlessness and not being that, and I think a lot of men feel that, and that's probably why that question is so tough, because it is so present and now, whereas maybe it is a little bit easier to project into the future of like what I'm trying to achieve when this is the sort of journey that I'm on. But Andrew, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about what it is that you do in the men's space?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I am a professional speaker. That is what pays my bills, from learning events to very, very large events. It really does vary. And generally, I speak on well-being topics. My main area is men's mental health. I have my own podcast as well, Men on Show, that sort of celebrates guys that are doing great things in the men's space, researchers, guys with stories that are challenging. And my whole passion is to answer two questions. Why are men and boys struggling? And what are we going to do about that? And answer that in a really balanced way that creates compassionate and considered debate. That's what takes up my time being in that space. Being a self-employed, busy professional speaker, the amount of work you have to do to create that environment for yourself where you are is all consuming as well. So I do bits of charity stuff as well. I'm a father of 5. My 2 daughters, older daughters, have grown up now and moved on. But I've got 3 boys under 12 at home. They keep me very busy. My wife works. But men's mental health is huge for me. I've got my own journey of mental health. A lot of that stemmed from a formerly abusive marriage. I'm blissfully remarried now. So I also have a talk where I deliver on domestic abuse, do quite a bit of that in schools, really looking at the reality of domestic abuse, the broader picture, parents abused by children, LGBT community, men and women as perpetrators and victims, and then really unpacking my story. Why do people stay? How do you spot the signs? What's the reality of gaslighting? How would you reach out to someone if you thought they might be in an abusive relationship? You feel a bit orcs about asking them. You don't want to upset them. You're aware they'll probably be their abuser's greatest defender. Yeah. But how do you structure that conversation? That's all the kind of stuff that I cover. And I am booked to talk about things like burnout and work-life balance, where actually it's not with the particular male focus on it. It's for everyone. So I love my job. I'm online. I travel a little bit, but not too much, considering I've got kids and my wife relies on me for school runs because she works in the NHS and her job's not very flexible. So I have a great life. I'm very, very blessed at the age of 50 to do a job that I absolutely love. And if I'm still doing it in 20 years, I'll be very happy.
Amazing. I hope you are. I really do.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's ask that question then. Why are men and boys struggling?
How long do you say this podcast is going to be? So I think there's many aspects to that conversation. So maybe it's more helpful if I touch on them briefly, but don't go into them in huge detail, unless you really want me to. If there's one that you're like, let's pick that apart. So I don't think we can underestimate the impact of austerity in terms of its impact on youth services. We lost 70% of government youth funding, which has resulted in the loss of thousands of youth workers, hundreds of youth centres closing. So places to go, safe places where you could do stuff, talented role models and youth workers gone. So I don't know what we thought. And that's affecting, of course, our girls and our boys, but it affects our boys. So that's an aspect. Austerity in terms of the impact on our social fabric of our society. Last year, 3 million people reached out to a food bank. In 2008, it was 26,000. Yeah. That is a staggering increase. And then when men carry this perception that part of my job as a man is to be protector, provider, it's very difficult to be those things today. So for me, the fabric of our society has changed. There's definitely been a breakdown in terms of community. A lot of that is tied in with austerity. The rise of automation. So there was some interesting research that Richard Reeves sort of championed and shared, the author of Men and Boys, where back in the 1950s, only 2.5% of men of prime working age were both unemployed and not looking for work either. Now it's 10%. And at the same time, the population size of America has doubled since the 1950s. That's a massive group of men of prime working age, not employed, not looking for work either. And we see a similar challenge in our industrial heartlands, formerly industrial heartlands, here in the UK. So there's a whole thing around automation, employment, austerity, that alongside some of these traditional stereotypes makes life really difficult as a guy. Don't even get me, well, no, do get me started on technology, online porn, online gambling, online addictions, which draw men in, that make us more sedentary than we would have otherwise been, less connected in person than we otherwise would have been. That has an impact. Comparisonitis. We've got the rise of negative body image issues now for men as well. That 40%, according to a BBC survey, between the ages of 16 and 40. 40 years ago, that might have been a problem for some, but not 40%. And that's again partly down to social media influence. Even comparisonitis, you go on LinkedIn. I have to be very careful with my psychology when I'm on LinkedIn. I use it a lot as a platform. There's always someone being promoted, won an award, best-selling book, speaking in Dubai at a bigger event than I'm speaking. I should be happy that I've got an event in Birmingham with 50 people because it's near where I live. And I am happy until I see my competitor in Dubai in front of 1,000 people. And now I'm less happy with this event that I was happy about. But comparisonitis plays a part. We've got this whole I call it male bashing narrative. And I think we need to be careful in how we use the terms toxic masculinity and patriarchy. I think those need careful picking apart. There's a lot of pain associated with those words for women and also for men. So being able to have considered debate, accepting that men struggle. I do hear in the domestic, I will shut up in a minute, let you get a word in, but I do hear in the domestic abuse field, and it's often with real relief when I describe what I'm going to cover, and I won't mention any names of organisations, but some will say, oh, well, we had a woman in from such and such big domestic abuse organisation, just to leave a hint, and it was just all anti-male, and there was no room for any discussion that men struggle, unless there was just a little footnote, well, the overwhelming minority of victims of domestic abuse are men, which isn't statistically true. So the narrative, I don't think, helps either. So I've not even mentioned the testosterone crisis either. Levels of testosterone falling across the male population, across all age groups. So, of course, with the impact of low testosterone, increased risk of heart attack, increased risk of diabetes, increased risk of depression, anxiety, can't concentrate, the list goes on. Sure. There are a few things, and then, of course, there'll be one magic solution. I'm looking for the magic solution so I can brand it and make my millions, but I haven't got there yet. So
I don't think there is one. I guess one of the things that would be useful for you and the conversation that we're sort of going into now, especially with you having sort of younger boys and this, is this gap between men who were the patriarchy and this gap between men who had it great and had it, like, even I'm not feeling any benefit from those guys. There's certain privileges of being white, straight, male, ability to walk at night, go for a run whenever I choose. Completely get all that. But from like a economical point of view, I don't really see any huge benefits. If anything, I do feel attacked or pulled and pushed in certain ways whenever I'm having those conversations or trying to get ahead or trying to get onto the ladder. So what do you think that's going to look like for boys, i.e. your sons, if we keep on this current trajectory?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Just to add to what you're saying, I see myself as hugely privileged. My parents weren't that well off, but they were the scrimping and saving, and so they could give the money to their kids. And I've benefited from that, as my two sisters have. It's nothing to do with gender, it's just class. Yeah. We were middle class, and our parents didn't splash the cash so they could give it to us as kids. So we've done well due to class. And I think class has a massive part to play. So I feel that I'm privileged. I think you mentioned the privilege about going for a run whenever you want. Where we live in Birmingham, I would be just as worried about my boys going for a run at 8 o'clock at night as I would my daughters, frankly. Yeah. So, for different reasons. So I think the language, it's interesting because when we try to create just a sensible, when I say low emotion, I kind of mean just like everyone's quite philosophical, no one's getting too heated with each other.
Yeah.
Try and have a conversation like that about the patriarchy
Yeah.
in a mixed group. It's going to be tricky, really tricky. And I think one of the things, I've got a social media post coming up on this actually, I think we can really get into what I call a data boxing match, where we just trade blows and data with each other, trying to score points and prove we're right, where really we just need to come together, and there are struggles. I think it's right that we have a certain privilege as a male. Men have had a privilege. I think there's a group of men who have extraordinary privilege, but I think they're a very small group of men. Actually, again, some of the amazing stuff Richard Reeves has been doing in America is drawing out actually for working class males, which includes a variety of ethnicities, for working class males, the outcomes in terms of life expectancy, the likelihood that they'll have a family are really, really poor. Research from Norway, I think that if you're in the highest socioeconomic bracket to the lowest, you're 7 to 8 times more likely to have a family if you're in the highest than the lowest. Economics is really driving the likelihood that you'll have a family, these things that you would have thought, being a father figure. So I think in answer to your question, I think the language needs to change. I believe that, your Tates, your Trumps, that they have seized on this widening resentment from men of where the diversity, equality, inclusion discussion has gone. And when I talk to, I don't think I'm a diversity, equality, and inclusion specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some lessons the DEI space needs to learn fast from what's happened in America. Because I don't want us to roll back on that work. We need to move forward with that work. But there are lessons to learn there, I think, about the need to draw men into those conversations in a positive way. That has to happen. Otherwise, we could have a government here. We could have the Reform Party who do the same thing, maybe. So I don't want that, but I could see it happening.
Yeah, so my thoughts on it are this, is that, so there's, just to use data, is that like 1 in 4 Gen Z, so that's sort of like 16 to 29, I guess your boys are sort of Gen Alpha into that sort of space, but they feel that it's harder to be a man now than it is a woman, which, if that continues on this trend, then are we then going to, is it like a lot of boys and a lot of young men are feeling like, rather than equality, we're sort of shifting to a matriarchy rather than a patriarchy? And I think that's going to create more resentment. I think that's going to increase violence against women and girls. I think that's going to increase all of those things that we've spent the last 125 years trying to iron out, create equality. Now, I'm going to say this because I think it's something that I've been biting my tongue on a little bit, but I do want to say it. I think that there is almost a "I want it now" mentality to a lot of these sort of initiatives. So whether that's DEI or the feminist movement, it's a case of, well, I don't have what I want now, so you're doing it wrong. And I don't know whether we need some dust settling or some time for these things. What's your opinion on that?
Is that, I'm going to offer an opinion, but sort of come back with a question as well. I think we're all more impatient than maybe our formerly generations would have been, because, even down to, I share this in some of my talks, it is ridiculous that I grew up in the 80s as a teenager. So I remember Guns N' Roses coming onto the scene in the late 80s, and those are the kind of bands I liked. If I had a cassette and the song that we were on was rubbish and I wanted to forward wind it, you'd have to go through this process of forward wind. You go, I've gone too far. Now I'm going to have to rewind backwards and forward. Now you just say Alexa next and off you go. Even down to preparing rice 40 years ago, you'd have to soak it, prepare it. You'd have to get the levels of water. It would take thought. Now stick a bag in the microwave, 2 minutes, job done. So we have this convenience culture, 24/7 culture, Amazon next day delivery. You can buy things round the clock, click. If I wanted to buy a CD, I'd have to get a bus into town it was cassettes to begin with. So I think we are more impatient. And when I float that as an idea, most people agree. And therefore, because of convenience culture, 24/7 culture, we carry those impatient expectations of ourselves on the things that we're working at. and our expectations of others and our expectations of change. And so I think you're right. I think we probably do want it now, but I don't think that's a gender thing. I think that's a cultural thing because of immediacy culture. That's what I think.
Yeah, it might not be
Do you think that?
I think you're right. I think we are more impatient. We are the generation of swipe up or swipe left. But the movements that are happening at the moment are specifically gender and sexuality and race based. So that's maybe where that link comes from. I do think that you're right. We're all, I want that now. I need that now. You talked about comparisоnism, like that's built into that as well, right? So it's not gender specific, but I think that's one of the problems with the way that DEI is implemented. I think it's not forced is probably the wrong word, but I think the way that they're trying to get it to equality is creating resentment and creating issues because they think the quickest way is to just force it in, which is then annoying certain men, both from like economic levels and also ethnic backgrounds as well. I think there's a lot of pressure on a subset of men who are not really included in the inclusive part of DEI.
Yeah. And the problem, I know, the more angry and resentful we become, I know I'm stating the blazingly obvious here, but then we can start to just become more blinkered. Yeah. And it's less likely that we'll look for counter arguments to pick apart our thinking. And I think that's a real problem. And then it's more likely that we'll follow the people that are saying the stuff we want to hear. And then suddenly we're in those echo chambers where it's just, you're not going to get out of it very easily. And then it is really difficult.
No, I agree. I think we enter echo chambers far too easily these days. I think it's very easy to find your tribe, as you said, and not go and bring the person in that might ruffle a few feathers and want to have a conversation around it. I think that's something that's really important to me that I've sort of noticed is that I'm not attacking DEI. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to be working. There seems to be companies devolving it. There seems to be companies not using it. There seems to be frustration on that side as well. Like, why are these men not embracing DEI? I'm just suggesting another way of doing it, and that annoys people.
Yeah, and obviously with the Trump thing, which has obviously created headlines, it was clear that that's what he was going to do. And we need to remember, I think sometimes we can have this stereotype that, it's men that have brought Trump into power, it's men that have flocked to Trump. But he increased his voter share of just about every group of women, Latino, Afro-Caribbean, young female voters. So there's obviously something that's not working for them either. And obviously, I keep saying, obviously, it's been a long week. The Christian right, some of that is just man and woman. And really, the Christian right, that's what they care about with diversity, equality, inclusion out in America. That really is a big issue for them for him to be seen to be taking action on that. And I don't think he really cares about this stuff personally, but he's playing to his audience and the people that voted him in. But I think, so maybe DI is not working for anyone, but for me, I'm a firm believer that it's a hugely important part of business moving forward and of our communities. But perhaps this is a chance to learn some lessons from what's gone wrong in America, bearing in mind that that's not just what's gone wrong in America. Yeah. He was voted in due to immigration concerns. The Democrats are rubbish at talking about how well the economy was beginning to do under Biden. They're just not. It was a poor campaign from the Democrats, which probably didn't help. But there is something, DEI needs a rethink, possibly, I would say.
Yeah, bit of a rebrand, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one. What I want to touch on, though, which I find really interesting that you mentioned it, is back onto Richard V. Reeves' conversation around lower economic males struggling the most. And I think he sort of found within that research that women in that who are in relationships, so you mentioned some of those subsectors of America, so Latin women, Christian women, those sort of things tend to be on the sort of lower economic threshold. His research showed that those women are still used to that traditional family dynamic. So they're looking for a male provider and to create that family dynamic. but they also have all this pressure of their economic side of things with they're not able to get a job that pays two wages because that's how society works now, right? Economically, we both bring to the table, and that's how a family unit works. What do you think that means? Oh, so the question to that is essentially going to link into your story a little bit. Can women be misogynistic?
I think, I think so. I need some sort of examples, I suppose. I feel like there's two separate things that you're so I think the thing about two people bringing money to the table, man being seen as provider, I love my wife. My wife's a wonderful woman. I'm lucky to have her in my life. We both work. My business is a full-time thing, so she works, when I say part-time, in quite a demanding NHS role. It's really hard parenting when both parents are working. We're always behind. There's always a million and one jobs to do in the house. We're always forgetting what the boys need this day and that day. And I am super organized. It's hard. The pressure is hard. It is really hard. And so I think that, you think about the gender pay gap, which is often described as sort of part of the patriarchy in quite simple terms, but actually very complex as a thing. We know in the UK that men work roughly 600 million hours collectively per week in the UK, women 450, because of the part-time, full-time thing. We know that if you're part-time, it's not just you're working less hours, so your pension pot will be smaller, but actually you will be less likely to be put forward for senior positions, most of which will be full-time and won't be job share in senior leadership positions. You won't be put forward for the in-house sponsored MSc. They're going to put those opportunities away. So you will fall behind, whether you're male or female, in part-time, but more women do part-time because of parenting. But then you look at parenting and you say, well, look, even if men have 6 weeks annual leave, which is what a lot of organizations are pushing for, which would be great, it doesn't solve the gender pay gap. No. Because actually, to solve it, working mums who work need to go full-time. They need to work more hours. But when asked, that's not what they want. They want to work part. So how do you solve the gender? So I think for me, women can be misogynistic. I think some of these topics that are highly sensitive, actually, we need to be able to talk about them in a balanced way, in a nuanced way, understand that there's no easy solution to them.
No, the example that I was sort of alluding to is like you're not man enough, you don't earn enough. That could be so. This is this is sort of like starting to move into the domestic violence side towards men and start to look at those sort of warning signs. These are conversations that I've been having recently that I'm finding quite interesting because it's quite a thorny topic, right? Men being domestically abused.
Well, that is, completely. I'm not sure that how much that's linked to how much money they bring in.
Or is it the perception of that? So that woman wants to be in a traditional, quote unquote, traditional family structure, and she doesn't feel that man is providing what she would be expecting in that.
Yeah, and in a healthy relationship, I'm in a healthy relationship, a man would be able to push back and say, well, look, I know, I'm a teacher, or well, whatever the job may be, I'm doing my best, we'll have to cut our cloth accordingly. In a healthy relationship, it just doesn't matter if the person. So, I have all kinds of chats with my wife. She wanted a second. We've got a Cavapoo. She wants a second dog. We had this conversation last night. Not a blinking chance are we getting a second dog. Affordability, pain in my neck. Just no. And no, and no. One is enough. But I can have that conversation easily because we have a lovely, healthy banter. Yeah. In an abusive relationship, I'd probably just suck it up, get a second dog, bitterly regret it, and think where the hell we're going to get the money from. So for me, domestic abuse is where the relationship becomes abusive, where one side is a bully and has the power and the control. My experience in domestic abuse was I earned a lot of money at the time. I had my own recruitment firm. Yeah. So that wasn't something my ex-wife could easily throw at me about earnings, but she certainly spent what came in, and it was really stressful. Yeah. Really, really very, very stressful. So to answer your question, women can absolutely be misogynistic and misandry. A lot of people don't even know what that term is. Yeah. And, that needs more education so we can spot the signs of misandry. But talking about domestic abuse, I think one of the misconceptions, I suppose, is that it's the overwhelming majority of victims are women. And that just statistically is not true. It just isn't true.
Yeah, well, I guess on that, it's you may know more than this than me, but I guess my theory on this is that it's going to keep getting more towards more and more male victims are going to occur because of what you said about being in a toxic relationship and one being sort of abusive. If men are constantly pushed down by society as a whole, do you think they're more likely to attract an abusive partner and not want to leave and not create boundaries and these sort of things?
Possibly, but what we've seen in the UK over the last 10 to 15 years is an explosion of men's communities. Yes, they're the big ones that everybody knows. Men in they're not called men in sheds now. There's the other official word, but anyway, that's how I refer to them. But I know it's not technically correct. And his man club are the two big ones. Everyone knows. But there's stacks of them. I got my own one. Nobody knows about it because a group of 40 dads from the local school. We play football every Friday. Go for beer afterwards. There's about 20 people per match. We've been going for years now. It's a dynamic community. We hold each other, metaphorically speaking, listen and connect. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful community. So, but there's been an explosion of men's community in the sense of understanding about men's well-being. And I think it doesn't matter how in some segments of society men are squashed down. I think there is a growing awareness around men's well-being. Yeah. There is a growing army of women, and I meet these women day to day in my work, and they are so passionate about men. And they are. I mean, I did an event last year. Won't name the company, but they're a massive manufacturer, and literally men's mental health. Most men were there because the Women's Alliance in that organisation had dragged them there, not kicking, screaming, but in a lovely way. I know, come on, guys, this is important. We care about you. It was the Women's Alliance. It came out of their budget that they paid me as a speaker to talk about men's mental health. There are fantastic women out there standing shoulder to shoulder with men. So I don't think men are going to be squashed down. I think what you'll see over the next 10 to 15 years is some of the data will change as more and more men speak out because it's becoming normal to speak out. There's so many campaigns about don't bottle it up. We're seeing it in football stadiums, seeing it on TV. That will mean, I think, that men will speak out a bit more to their mates than they might once have done. And so I think we'll see a revolution over the next 10, 20 years. I think the number of male victims will go up just because the reporting, the men reporting goes up. I don't see any, I'm very sure, as much as I can be, that you're not going to see men being squashed down. There is that narrative, there is gender tension. We have to try to fix that. But I think that men speaking, connecting, that's going up. And again, organisations that get me in, often it's to launch a men's community where they say, we've had a women's network, it's got a budget, it's been going for years. But there's nothing for men. We got to do something. And they really want to do something. It's great to see.
No, it's amazing to see for sure. I guess talking on men talking, right? And this may be me being slightly uninformed, but I'm going to use it as an example. You used to have like your mate who would come out for a drink and then he'd be like, I've got to go, the missus has texted me, right? And he'd get some stick for that. It's like, oh, you're under the thumb, you're doing this. Like, is that technically the start of like abuse, or is that classed as abuse? What does like...
It's a great question. So I've left the pub several times in the last few months because my wife's texted me, Andrew, please, can you come home because X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Same banter. Oh, you didn't get a full kitchen pass this time, just a partial kitchen pass. Yeah. My wife is amazing and balanced and gorgeous and lovely. And it's just because the kids were being a pain in the neck. And it's not that she wouldn't have gone mad at me had I not come straight home. She might have said, oh, I could really have done with you coming home. That's just normal stuff. But where it could be a red flag, I suppose, is if actually it happens like every week. Yeah. If he looks hassled, if he's looking like he's getting a bit edgy, if every time he's the only one, then you might just check in. Look, and you might say to him, look, it's probably nothing, but I just want to check you are okay because I just noticed. And he'll probably be very defensive. It could be. And there's a lot of things that could be red flags, but then maybe they're not. So it's something to look out for if it was repeated behaviour. It's a bit like if he comes in with a black eye and says he got drunk and fell over in a shower. Well, he might have done, but actually if that becomes a regular thing, that might be worth looking out for. So for me, it's about repeated patterns.
Yeah, for sure. I think there are, I can think of a couple of blokes like that. And they may be, to be honest with you, they may be not happy, but they're not. It's also not like the end of the world for them to be with their missus. Some people like that sort of codependency as well, right? It's not just she's controlling him. They might not want to admit it, but they'd rather be with the missus than the mates.
Yeah, and also with domestic abuse, which is a bit of it's a tricky topic, but one that we need to be able to talk about. This wasn't my experience of it, but I do have a very close friend of mine. Thankfully, he's not in the relationship with this woman anymore. They were both not well suited. They both sported, when I say sported, that's probably the wrong word. They both had occasions where they had bruises from each other. They were violent with each other. It was a very dysfunctional relationship. And I suppose if the police were arriving at their house, it just depends on the look of the drawer on the day. So we have to give airtime for that as a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think it's important for me. One of the key signs with domestic abuse, or I hope I obviously spend the rest of my life with my wife. But if for some reason something happened to her and I was dating again in that hypothetical situation, for me, one of the key triggers might not be domestic abuse, but certainly a bullying type of relationship that could then lead to becoming abusive as that pattern sets and the dynamic is put in place, is where you feel like you're constantly treading on eggshells on everything, disagreeing politically, the purchase of the puppy, breaking your partner's favourite wine glass if they've got one, and you're dreading telling them, what? Why are you dreading telling them that you've broken their favourite wine? You might tell them, say, I'm really sorry, and they might go, oh, that's my favourite wine glass, and then it moves on in any reasonable relationship. So for me, a red flag for you personally, or for anybody listening to this, is if you know that there's a lot of things that feel like you're treading on eggshells, watch out. That is, for me, that's probably the biggest red flag that I would look out for. The wine glass break, I'll admit that I did do that within my formerly abusive relationship. And I was so horrified, the quickening heart, mouth gone dry. My ex-wife was out the house, and I actually hid the evidence of that broken glass in my neighbour's recycling, prayed that no one would ask or notice. And then a couple of days later, she asked, and I just tried not to go red. And I was like acting all, I don't know where it's gone. I don't know. Like, that's how ridiculous it becomes in an abusive relationship. So if you know you're avoiding conversations, you're not saying what your needs are, anything that could potentially be sensitive, you're not going to say a word on it, and you're treading on eggshells. If there's some bad news that you have to give, that you're sort of diluting it, making it as, if you know that's what's it, then chances are it's either abusive or the balance of power is out of kilter, so it could then become abusive.
Yeah, I think this. So I'll touch on this briefly after, but I think when you're getting in a relationship, I think a lot of men have still failed to create boundaries for themselves, maybe have a little bit of self-respect in certain areas. And if you want to word it like that, that's sort of the logical way of wording it. But that's what I think it is. It's like, this is how I'm going into this relationship, and being able to walk away. And it's not the end of the world to walk away from a relationship. Not every relationship is abusive. Not every relationship has to be abusive. Not every relationship is perfect.
100%, 100%. And I'm very clear on boundaries. So for me, this has helped me because I didn't have any boundaries with my ex-wife, and now I do. But I am actually a really easygoing person, very flexible on most stuff. But for me, I've got my boundaries where they're like really kind of rollover boundaries where, like, I've got a desired outcome in mind. I've got a preference, and I'll happily state that and be walked all over. That's all right. I know what those things are. And in terms of my needs, like, I'd rather it was this way, but whatever if it's not. And they've got my sort of more rigid boundaries where I'll dig in a little, but there's still a bit of maneuver for room for some compromise. And I know what some of those things are, and I would dig in a bit, but give a little bit of leeway. And in those situations, you need to know how far you're prepared to be pushed and stretched. And then I got my rock solid boundaries that I won't budge on at all. But I have to be careful with those, because if you've got a rock solid boundary, you've got to be able to see it through.
Yeah.
So you've got to be clear on what those are. And I do think about my boundaries in that way. To say again, I think about my boundaries every day. Well, that's not obviously true. Some of it's instinctive, but I do check in when I'm thinking about what kind of man I want to be, what do I want to achieve, if I'm reflecting on things where I feel like I've overreacted or underreacted, if I feel like I've been pushed into something that I now regret, could be a work thing, I check in with my boundaries and just, But for me, thinking of them in those, there's not one type, there's three types of boundaries: rollover, sort of flexible, and not flexible. There is a helpful way of thinking about it.
I think you hit the nail on the head, right? They are that in that time period, but if you reflect on them, they can change.
So, and I've set my sort of rock solid boundaries and thought, I haven't even got the energy to see this through or fight this, even though I don't want it to be flexible, and I need to be flexible. I need to find some room. So they can absolutely change retrospect in the moment. But just having an awareness of those boundaries, I think, is a good starting point. And one of the things, is a little tip that I've done that's really helped me, is before saying yes, no, it depends, if I'm being asked to do something, if I know the person is quite pushy, or they're my boss, or there's someone that I want to please, I tend to buy myself a bit of time. Just, I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. I just need to look at something. There's a couple of people in my life that I do that to. And it just helped me to step back and go, actually, right, let me just think about this. And then I will get back to them. I'll never delay it. If I say I'll get back to you in 5 minutes, that's what I'll do. But just being able to pause before committing to whatever it is, or not committing, has really helped me. Really, really helped me.
There's stoicism in disguise there, Andrew.
Stoicism in what? I didn't catch the second word.
Stoicism in disguise there.
Yeah.
Just taking a breath for sure. I think over the whole subject of men's mental health, men's issues across the whole thing, language is a big part. And I think when you're treading around a thorny subject like domestic abuse, especially with sort of most violence committed is men on men or men on women, it's quite hard to do that. And that for me is something that I have an issue with in this whole space, is the use of language and how it's used. How do you see that changing, or what do people need to do to not make everything so sharp or clear cut?
To make sure it's not sharp or clear cut. I do think understanding some of the nuances would be a really good start. It really saddens me that some of the larger domestic abuse organisations don't just say, look, according to the data, women are the greater proportion of victims, but actually there's a very sizable male minority. Actually admitting that the statistics of the LGBT community contributes to the statistics. Actually, most of the big domestic abuse organizations know this, that what research there is on the LGBT community suggests that domestic abuse is more prevalent in female to female relationships than male to male, which really surprised me. I'd have thought probably 50-50, but it's not. They know this, but won't state it. And I think that's a real shame. And I think honesty around data is really, really important, and shining a light on some of the more inconvenient things is really important. I feel like if we could do that and be a bit more honest, that would help. I feel like as well, we have an epidemic against violence against women and girls, but crazily, men and boys are included in those stats, because if you're a victim of violence as a man, you fall under the women and girls strategy, because there isn't a separate strategy for men and boys. So all it requires is to say, look, let's just strip this out and just be very clear about this. And I think that would help. I think being able to have balanced debate about the gender pay gap, really looking at, well, actually, it's probably a parenting pay gap, more of it. Because if you compare the salaries of women and men that are not parents, there really isn't a gender pay gap. But if you compare the salaries of men and women that are parents, there really is a gender pay gap. So actually, is that because men are awful? Is it because men are clinging to power? I'm not sure that it is.
Yeah.
So being able to have nuanced, gentle debate, the art of debating respectfully, if we ever had it, is definitely not there now. Yeah. And we can blame social media, but being able to have more of that kind of input in our schools, colleges, communities, maybe just less time on social media would also help us in having more nuanced debate. I mean, it's a big question that you've asked, but I hope that gives some sense of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, there's no small questions on this podcast, but I was told to keep them within a time frame. So that's where we're at. Maybe we will get into bigger ones and those side of things. But yeah, just so you know, they did check into same-sex marriages of women, and the mother was the one that the biological mother, sorry, was the one that's wage shrunk, and if they swapped to the next child being the other woman in the relationship, their wages recalibrated and sort of came back to it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done.
There is one thing that's never really discussed is, so how do we get, if they even want to, working women to work more hours? Oh, sorry, working mums to work more hours. That's what must happen. But then let's look at the conflicting data from the World Health Organization that says women should exclusively breastfeed for more than 6 months, and certainly continue to breastfeed till the child is 2 or 3. How can you go back to work full time and exclusively breastfeed? When a baby feeds, if it's exclusively breastfed, having been through this, when my wife says, "Oh, I'm just off to feed Henry," our youngest wife, I know she's not, that means she's out of action for 2 or 3 hours. Yeah. Because he'll suckle, he'll feed, you remove him from the breast, he'll scream his lungs out. So breastfeeding is absolutely inconvenient, yet the very best thing the mother could do for her own health, for the baby's health. And so let's talk about that. Like, that's not a male construct. We didn't design that. So I feel, again, for me, trying to bring in all the angles to the table and respectfully talk about it, even if the conversation is not going your way, getting used to going, okay, that's all right. I'm learning stuff. This feels like it grates with me, but I'm going to be okay with that. I think we need to get better at being okay with stuff that grates us. You can quote me on that.
I will.
Yeah.
That's the thumbnail.
Yeah.
Andrew, we talked a lot about a lot of sort of topics, but I would love to get your opinion on what you think is doing really well in the men's space and what you want to see more of in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah. Men's initiatives and communities. There's so many, some that have appeared on my podcast. Ben Mason, who formed the Grieving Pint, Scott Oughton Johnson, Proper Blokes Club, I often mention it because they don't get the mention that Men Sheds, Andy's Man, and those groups are amazing as well. Let's just be really clear about that. There's so many. You did a well-run Brum, that the running group where they get a speaker and you were selected to be a speaker and you ran with them. I have my informal men's football where we hold in this space, we support each other. There's banter. There was one guy before Christmas said he didn't want to be here anymore. We gathered round him. People were checking in on him, supporting him. Beautiful. Men's communities, we should be so excited about the variety of men's communities. I don't want to sit in a talk club. I want to play football and talk it out over a pint. That's just me. I don't even drink that much, but that's what I would want to do. If I ever had therapy, I'd rather do it in a pub than in a therapy room. And so I think the sheer variety of men's communities, the explosion of men's communities, man versus fat. So it's got a football league, it's got a rugby league now across the country. Men creating teams calling themselves Atletico Madrid, Real Madras, Pork Vale. I love some of these names that use humour, but we should be excited and we should be building on that and looking at how we create these communities internally within our organisations as well, if men want them, and asking that. And I think communities we're seeing change. We should be excited about it. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, amazing. We've had Scott, and Richard is coming out soon. So both of those podcasts.
Yeah, Ben Mason, Grieving Pint, a terrific fellow. He's got a great story. So I recommend you reach out to him.
I will do, but there's loads. It is. There's lots of spaces, which is great. Andrew, it's been a pleasure. I think we maybe didn't disagree as much as we used to, but we had a debate, maybe a new form of debate. But if people have liked what they've heard and they want to find out more, where's the best place to find you? And I will leave the final thoughts with yourself.
Right, okay, bless you. Best place to find me is really easy. My surname, Pain, initial is A. You'd have thought my parents would have thought about that. What were they thinking? But LinkedIn on my website, Andrew Payne, easy to find there. Always pleased to connect with people. Always pleased to have respectful debate with anybody that wants it. And you, as a final thought, I think we can create change as allies for each other. Allyship is a two-way, cross-cultural, cross-gender thing. We need to champion women and girls and equality, and stand with our sisters and mums and find out about their challenges. Attend World Menopause Day. It's the way forward. And they too, we need their support. We need women to be with us shoulder to shoulder. So that's where we have to try and meet in the middle respectfully. And like I say, maybe that's the thumbnail for this. Be okay with stuff that grates with us, and use that as a little nudge to go, okay, let me listen to this. It feels like it grates. So that's my reminder that I've got to listen, therefore, rather than I just got to feel angry and go back and get involved in data boxing, which just goes nowhere.